Hello and welcome to another installment of the ARC Smart City Podcast. I'm Larry O'Brien. I'm Vice President of Research at ARC Advisory Group. And today we have a couple of very interesting guests with us. We have Seth Dobrin of IBM. Good morning, Seth.
Hey, good morning.
And we have good morning. We have Graham MacDonald of the Urban Institute. How you doing, Graham?
Doing great. Great to be here, Larry.
So we were talking a little bit about what are we going to call this episode. It's a little different from what we normally do. Normally, if you tune into our podcast, we talk a lot about technology. We don't talk a lot about the benefit of technology. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about AI, but we're also going to talk about how can we make neighborhoods better? How can we use AI for good? So this is a couple of things that I really like to talk about is practical application of AI, which we don't see a lot of, and how can we use that to actually do some good? Okay. So why don't we start by introducing you guys? We can start with Seth. Seth, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role at IBM and what you do and how you became involved in this project that we're going to talk more about?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone about this really important topic. So Seth Dobrin, I'm the Global Chief AI Officer here at IBM. My responsibility is multifold. First and foremost, I'm responsible for defining the AI half of IBM's hybrid cloud and AI strategy across the whole company. So what does that mean for IBM? How do we go to market? How do we do communications? And in fact, how do we engage with folks like the Urban Institute for around AI for good? So how do we bring the power of not just IBM technology, but the people inside IBM who are very passionate about helping NGOs implement AI to make themselves better, to make the world a better place. And so that's how we started interacting with Graham and the Urban Institute.
I think it's great that you're doing this partnership too. These public-private partnerships really produce a lot of interesting results. And Graham, I'll have you introduce yourself since you're from the Urban Institute.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, my name is Graham MacDonald, and I'm at the Urban Institute, as you said. The Urban Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization, and our goal is to elevate the debate. So what we try to do is provide evidence, data into the public debate to help folks make better decisions and to improve the outcomes for communities, government, and what we call change makers, who could be folks from the corporate sector, from the government sector, individual citizens, advocates trying to make change, and hopefully making that debate a little bit more evidence-based. And my team, I lead the data science team and a technology and data science team here at the Urban Institute, and we really try to take the leading edge technologies and to use that in our data systems to help to drive that change. And so we often rely on folks like Seth and the great people at IBM who are really at the cutting edge of this work to help us to drive even further into that domain. So really excited to be here and to be here with Seth to talk about this project.
Yeah, we're glad to have both of you. So Seth, maybe you can explain a little bit about what this project is and how we're using this artificial intelligence technology to produce better results in neighborhoods and make lives better for people, right? When we talk about smart cities at ARC, we usually talk about the benefits to certain groups of people, right? There's economic benefits, there's social benefits, there's environmental benefits. I usually find whatever benefits the citizens and the people usually provides a lot of other benefits too. But let's talk a little bit about how we're using technology in this case to help, drive better results and make lives better for people.
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk about the technology and kind of how we're approaching this, and let Graham talk about the outcomes since he's closer to it. So, I think it's important to remember a couple things. So first, and it's important to remember that a lot of nonprofits, in fact, most nonprofits, don't have access to the same resources and people that for-profit companies often do. So it's harder for them to attract talent. Because they don't pay as much while they may be working on something that's socially good. And there are people that will give up some salary, like Graham, in order to work on things that are going to benefit society overall. How can we, as companies, better engage with these nonprofits to help fill that gap so that Graham can have help? Folks like Graham can have help in executing projects because he can't do it on his own. And equally as important is how do we provide access to the tools and technologies that are required to not only build AI, but operationalize and productionize AI models. Because it's one thing to build a model, it's another thing to put it into production and govern it appropriately. And so bringing tools like and technologies like that to bear here. Plus, in today's world, and especially when we start looking at things like, how do we help the Urban Institute better manage gentrification in the communities? How do we ensure that it's done in a trustworthy manner? So how do we ensure that it's fair, so free of specific type of biases, or in this case, how do we help them identify specific types of biases? How do we make the models transparent? How do we make them robust? And how do we ensure that we're preserving the privacy of people that are being impacted by these models? What we did was we brought our tools, so our Cloud Pak for Data with Watson Studio, to the Urban Institute, along with some folks from the Data Science and AI Elite team, to work on this problem that I'll let Graham get into now.
Yeah, Graham, tell us a little bit about the problem here. I know we're talking about gentrification. I think most people probably have some idea what that means. I know I witnessed it personally living in Austin, Texas for several years.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely saw that happening there. So tell us about your side of this.
Sure. So, although we're called the Urban Institute, we study every single place, rural and urban in the U.S., but we have a special focus in many of our projects on cities. And so this is an issue we've been studying for a long time. And, this is the upward pressure on rents, and folks who have more resources in neighborhoods is often what we refer to as gentrification. And the results of gentrification that we're usually most interested in mitigating are those where the folks who have lived there for a long time, who call the neighborhood their home, but for whatever reason, maybe they're retirees and can't afford the rapidly increasing property taxes, or maybe they're folks who, have a strong family network there and rent there, but the rents are just rising too rapidly, but they need that childcare, right, to stay in that neighborhood and get those resources for their opportunities to jobs that are nearby or whatever that may be. We want to preserve that. We want to ensure that everyone has access to those types of resources and neighborhoods, because then we thrive as a country when we all have access to those resources. Similarly, we're also focused here on what I would call anti-gentrification a little bit as well, Larry, which is the other side of that coin. The folks like us and like the Department of Housing and Urban Development and local governments and as well as state governments are very interested in preventing the decline, because we're not only talking about really hot cities like you said in Austin, but we're also concerned about Rust Belt cities that where neighborhoods have less opportunity, and we want to make sure that there is some intervention to ensure that those folks also have access to opportunity as well. So when we're talking about what the there is, it's to try to understand what is happening to these neighborhoods in real time and to make a difference, to intervene, to somehow to tip the scale so that there is equitable growth, because we know that all people have access to opportunities, people do better. And so the real core of this project is we don't know where that's happening right now, and that's the big puzzle piece we tried to solve.
Yeah, you can't control what you can't measure, right? So how are we using AI to measure this, and what are we measuring, and how does this whole thing work? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about the measures, and Seth's more the expert on the AI
yeah,
side.
I think it's interesting too that you're bringing up. This isn't just about anti-gentrification. This is about giving people access to resources so they can stay where they are and be successful in their communities long term, right? And not get pushed out, whether that's gentrification or whether that's because, like you said, you live in a Rust Belt town, or coming from Texas or driving through Colorado. There's tons of little towns that are struggling. So those people need help too. So I think that's a good way to balance it out.
That's right, and that's the problem that the Department of Housing and Urban Development originally approached us with when we were talking with them, and where we started experimenting on this AI journey with them was, is there, we have data right now that is anywhere from 2 to 7 years old on neighborhood change, on which neighborhoods this is occurring, right? And the problem is we want to know where it is now, right?
Yeah,
if we want to make a difference, we can't say, oh yeah, that's great, it was that way 5 years ago. But as we all know, as you said, Larry, living in Austin, but I can see here living in DC or whatever city you live in, we can all point to neighborhoods where they've changed massively in the last few years. And then we put COVID on top of it, where the most recent data is from before COVID that we have right now. And now we're talking about housing markets that have been upended as a result of COVID. And we're trying to figure out, well, where do we intervene now? Not where do we intervene 2 years ago is the government policy response. So we initially worked with HUD to sort of define what, and HUD is my acronym, I do see acronym coming out, the Department of Housing and Urban Development,
yep.
To define neighborhoods that were gentrifying, declining, inclusively growing, which is what we like, or unchanging. They just, there wasn't a ton of change happening. And the vast majority of neighborhoods happen to be in the unchanging or inclusively growing category. And there are a small number of neighborhoods that are in the declining and gentrifying category. And what we were trying to do was define those neighborhoods and then use machine learning, taking the old data that we have to project or predict in real time what is happening right now. And that's where the AI came in. We had done a lot of that work, a lot of work with HUD to get a model where we wanted, where it could be, accurate at what we were doing. But actually what we found out through this process, which is really fascinating, is that accuracy was almost not very important at all in this project. And the two most important things were, precision, which is the relative accuracy with which the correct ones were predicted, which matters because that's where government cares about spending its money. They want to spend the money in the most efficient way possible. And the second was we were great and we did really well at predicting unchanging and inclusively growing neighborhoods, but we did a terrible job in predicting the declining and gentrifying neighborhoods, which are the ones we care most about intervening in.
Yeah.
And so we had to work with the IBM team to sort of construct different measures of success in this project. And so the technology was both about getting a better AI model and about how we better define it to meet the goals that we want to meet in this project.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the model and how we develop those goals to arrive at an outcome. Seth, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I also want to jump back really to something that Graham mentioned, and since you said this is usually a more technical podcast, maybe I'll dig a little deeper. So Graham was talking about the metrics that we were using to measure the model performance. And oftentimes we think about accuracy, and if you think about what accuracy is, it's did I hit the bullseye? And not necessarily did I hit the bullseye every time, but did I hit the bullseye? Precision looks at what is the grouping. So are we precise? So is every time are the darts going in the same spot or about the same spot, regardless of if they're accurate? And in a case like this where accuracy is less important, we want to make sure you measure the predictive ability. Or the precision rather, because it's easier to move a cluster to be more accurate than it is to tighten up a dispersion around some level of accuracy. And so I guess the point is the metric is not always am I accurate? The metric is use case by use case, and you need to have a thoughtful design of what your metric's going to be. There also needs to be some business metric that's associated with it, and that's some of the things that Graham talked about.
Okay. Can I jump in real quick there, Seth? Do you mind?
Yeah.
Well, I'll say if in this case, I'll define precision, and the way the government defines precision working with HUD is great. It's, are we most efficient with our money? Which is different than, you can be very accurate, but you'll have to spend $1 trillion to get to all the gentrifying neighborhoods. What they care about is, how can we spend less money and still hit the same number of neighborhoods? And that's when increasing the precision with Seth's team was really key, is we're making these models more efficient in the way that we target and spend that money. And that's much more important to them than whether we move a point in accuracy.
Okay. We're getting a little introduction to data science here, I feel.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Actually, it's interesting. Sometimes we go in and help customers, whether they're nonprofits like the Urban Institute or others, and we help them solve the wrong problem. So in this case, we could have helped them solve how to spend $1 trillion and help one neighborhood, right? But we actually did a good job defining the outcome up front. And so you can solve the wrong problem using the tools of data science and AI if you don't do a good job up front.
That's a good point, and I think it's something everybody should take away from this podcast. So let's talk about how you're doing it. So how does this play out on the ground? We're measuring, different variables in different neighborhoods and putting that into a model, I assume, and trying to use that model to predict, is this neighborhood headed in the right direction?
Yeah. So I think, AI doesn't happen in a vacuum, or data science doesn't happen in a vacuum. In order to do that, you need data. And Graham mentioned about the data, and we have pretty extensive data going back a few years. We have less data more recently. COVID kind of made the data that did exist pre-COVID somewhat irrelevant. Maybe irrelevant's not the right word, but less.
I think it's probably a pretty good word, because everything's totally different.
Less informative is probably a better word, because it didn't completely throw away everything. But it changed the game. It was an outlier, right? A couple of outlier years. But it's the world we live in now, the impacts of COVID. And so, how do you take that data and how do you leverage it in order to make predictions? And so, there's this, in this case, the group looked at 8 metropolitan areas along the East Coast and central US. And they analyzed this data using census tract level. And so, we also pulled in additional data to help. So Zillow Home Value Index and Rent Index data was used. There's a housing choice voucher program that's available in the public. And then there are other data sets that can be pulled in that show, that can kind of help influence it. So the point is, it's not one data set, and it's not necessarily only data that an entity or a company has ownership of. There's lots of public data out there.
Oh yeah.
And lots of third-party data that can help you fill in gaps around what's going on. So for instance, the Zillow data very much informed the changes that were happening due to COVID in this case, because they were more real-time or more up-to-date than the data that the government provided to the Urban Institute.
Yeah, and I think that's something that as an analyst covering the smart city space, I see that a lot. There's a lot of data from a lot of different sources. I cover smart city platforms. A lot of my previous podcasts have been kind of around that smart city platform topic, which does tend to get kind of technical, and we end up talking about things like, we need to take this data from all these different sources, whether it's publicly available government data, or like you said, Zillow, kind of data. There's a lot of different data sources out there. And the government doesn't provide real-time data, right? I mean, all the data you're getting from the government is going to be a year old, 2 years old. So that, and they provide great data. I mean, I go to government data all the time, when I'm doing research, but it's that dynamic real-time aspect of it. And with COVID and climate change and everything else, things are changing a lot faster in the urban landscape, or within, even rural cities and communities. Things are just changing faster. One of the ways I put it was, it feels like everything is happening at once, because it is, right? You've got COVID and supply chain problems and climate related issues and things like that. So we're taking this data from all these different sources and combining it together to form a common model. I'm not sure how deep you want to get into that, but I assume you have this common data model that you've put together. Can we talk a little bit about that in layman's terms that our listeners can understand? Or
yes. So Graham, I'll let you take that one.
Sure, that sounds great. Yeah. So essentially what we're doing is we are taking the ground truth data that the government provides, right? So we're taking the American Community Survey data, the most recent we have, and we are using that data as the base, right? So we recognize that that's what governments, that's what local activists, that's what folks are using now to determine neighborhood change. They're saying, I'm looking at the average, and in this case, because we're looking at the neighborhood level and because the census combines years, we're talking about an average from 2015 to 2019 of the American Community Survey that currently serves as what is happening in 2021, right? So that's how we start, and because that's what people are using. That's our baseline we use to measure our progress. And then we say, let's take all these other sources that Seth described. Let's take Zillow. Let's take out the common the housing choice vouchers from today. Let's take Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data. Let's take whatever data that we have available and that has more recency to it, and let's use that using from the gold standard to predict what is happening now. And we basically can back test it. We can use previous years of data, knowing the later years of data gold standard, so we can use 2012 to predict 2016 or something like that, right? To see how accurate our model performed in the past and use that as a benchmark for the future. So basically, we're taking this, gold standard data, using some of the more real-time data sources, and predicting or fast forwarding to the present day. And I think one thing to note, and that I think was really interesting, and it was a benefit of coming out of the partnership with IBM, not only defining the best way to do this in terms of weighting our metrics, so we actually got gentrification and decline neighborhoods right, which we did, which I thought was awesome, which we didn't do in our HUD partnership.
Yeah, that is awesome.
And getting and massively improving our precision, or the efficiency with which government funds could be spent, which I think is number two. But number three is we actually didn't end up with a common model. We actually ended up with city level models at the end of the day. Because what we found was that a common model did well, but city models did better. And there are just factors that are different about every city, which any longtime resident of a city will tell you. But as a data scientist, we always want a model that describes it all, right? One model to rule them all. And what happened was we ended up focusing on these individual level models. And that has two benefits. One is we were able to focus on city level factors and make them more accurate for each city. But the second is that, Seth will probably share this later, is we ended up sharing the code and the Cloud Pak online, along with our white paper and cheat sheet and things like that. And we have partners in these local cities that we hope in the future will be taking that data that we added to the model and adding their local data set to it, right? Their local knowledge, and being able to use that to make this more accurate for their city or their, local council people, which is what we hope will happen in the future with this, is that, A, we're more accurate by looking at a city level, but B, we enable ourselves to, by open sourcing this information, to help those local actors who are good with data add their perspective, which, as we all know stuff about cities that isn't described in these data sets that can tell a story and help us to predict neighborhood change better.
Yeah, and I think there's a few underlying points in there that are good to pull out. So one is that we need to look at what problem we're trying to solve, and it's not uncommon that we go into the data science elite team or IBM Consulting will go in to try and help a customer, and they're trying to solve this big problem. So in this case, housing, and they're trying to solve it kind of globally, and globally meaning not on a granular scale. We see the same thing. We went in with an insurance company. They were trying to do stuff with Medicare, and they were trying to predict what Medicare claims were going to get rejected for the U.S. And really, you need to look state by state, because every state has their own way of doing Medicare, their own Medicaid, their own requirements. And so you need to actually build 50 models in that case, right? In the case of, because everyone's different, and they had been trying for years to build one model, and it just doesn't work. Similar thing happened here, where the Urban Institute was trying to solve this big problem, and the data science and AI elite team helped Graham and the data scientists at the Urban Institute focus down and say, look, the problem is really at the community level, right, or at the city level, and building a model that solved that, and building a pipeline of data. So, the features, what we call features, which are the data elements that go into it. The way this project helps accelerate that is it's the same type of data, the same features or data elements that are brought together or transformed. And you're creating a data pipeline that you can now bring information from a specific city in to feed the model for that specific community or that specific city. So it helps accelerate it. And that's the cookbook, if you will, or the set of Jupyter notebooks, which are the basically the code, the home of the code that's documented. Now anyone can take that for any community, pick it up, insert their data, build the right features, and have the model get trained off of those so it delivers a good outcome for them. And so we also need to remember that the outputs of these are probabilistic, not deterministic, meaning that it's going to give you a likelihood. It's not going to give you the answer. It's going to give you this is likely to happen. And we see that with elections, right? So we see election predictions, right? Nate Silver is this great data scientist who predicts elections, but even if it's 90% accurate, he's still going to be wrong 10% of the time, right? And so understanding that AI is a prediction, and a prediction is probabilistic, not deterministic. So we're not determining the answer. We're telling you the answer is, this is the answer that's likely to happen. And that provides, probabilistic in this case is probably a better thing, because now it's going to provide the city planners the nonprofits that are involved in the communities a set of possible outcomes that they can then look at and put in context of their community. You know, here are the 5 things that you should be looking at if you're trying to manage, you know, community change in Austin. And now the city leaders and the community leaders in Austin can go in there and say, well, you know what, this one's at the top really doesn't make sense for us right now. And so let's have the humans get involved and determine, you know, the second best and the third best ones are really the ones that we think are going to help, the levers that we need to pull to make this a better place. And so having the humans in the loop, helping them reduce the near infinite possibilities down to something that a human brain can get their head around is really the value of something like what we've built with the Urban Institute here.
Yeah, I mean, you're enabling humans to make better decisions, you know, and at the root, I think that's what a lot of this is about. We're enabling people to make better decisions. We're not just relying on the technology to make the decisions for us.
Yeah, and you know, AI, the value of AI is to augment human intelligence, not necessarily replace it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to bring out in this podcast. Thank you for doing that. I do want to talk about resources later because you mentioned open source and people can take this technology and use it in their own communities. But let's talk first about outcomes. So we've talked a little bit about data sources and building models and, you know, how can we drive good results by having the human in the loop. But what are some of the results? What are some of the outcomes that you're seeing right now with this project?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think, you know, this is something we released a couple months ago, 3 months ago. So I think we're still working with folks in the field on this one. But I think it's very promising, right? I think, you know, we talked to some people who are very interested. We have you know, local data intermediaries that are in cities across the country. Not surprisingly, as an urban institute, we have a vested interest in knowing what's going on with our data people in different cities that are very interested and have been using a lot of different pieces of our work throughout the pandemic to try to get a better sense of what's going on real time. Because what we hear in the field is everyone wants real time data right now. Every government entity, every local data player. We want real-time data. That's great. You have something before COVID. That'll be a good story we can tell to our kids one day, right? But right now, we want to know how we can improve the situation because things are dynamically changing in real time. And I think if there's one thing this pandemic has shown us, it's that we didn't have good real-time data systems before, especially in the public sector. And, you know, there is a ton of demand for this. We have been at Urban advising state, local, federal governments on this, you know, on this issue because our goal is to elevate the debate, is to provide better data. And often our answer is we don't have it, but things like this, you know, solutions like this are very promising and people are really interested in taking it to the next level. What we've had to work through, though, is, as Seth said in the beginning, you know, there's not a lot of data capacity in our sector, right? You know, federal government, big city governments, maybe big state governments have some data analysts, but even then you'd be surprised that there aren't as many that can sort of take this and run as much as they can, as much as we'd like them to. So we've been very focused on our data intermediaries. These are folks who are, you know, university partners or city partners who are really data savvy across cities. And they are the ones who are most, I think, able and interested in taking this, you know, and tweaking it to their local needs and then helping their local folks to understand what's going on, as well as we're directly engaging with folks at the federal level, like I mentioned with HUD, but also with other federal agencies on ways in which they can just think better about the data infrastructure that they currently have and how that might play into machine learning or AI in the future. Because some of them are at that stage and others are just at the very beginning of their data maturity level and really need folks to help them move along that ladder. So, you know, right now we're really excited about the excitement that's out there about helping people to adopt this. We haven't obviously seen the effects of this going forward yet because it's only been 3 months old. So looking forward to seeing what they are. I think that the demand for this real-time data is almost infinite at the moment.
Yeah, data is a huge problem for governments in general, right? Look in the U.S. right during COVID, there is no standard that's, you know, for COVID data, for public health data. Every state had their own way of collecting data, their own data sets that they collected. So not every state collected the same data. There were, you know, disparities in what was reported and how it was reported. And even looking at the CDC data during the COVID was typically at best 7 days outdated, if not more. WHO data was even more outdated. And so we have government officials that are making decisions on data that they, should be, we want it to be, within a day, let alone, we're talking about weeks that they're making their decision, making decisions and actions on. And I think we're lucky in the housing area. It's a little bit more standardized in this case because HUD has done a good job of saying, okay, if you want to participate in these kinds of loan programs or these kinds of access programs, you need to report this data and you need to report it in this way. So they've done a really good job. But I think government data, and it's not just in the US, we need to do a better job of enabling governments and municipalities to collect better data so that we can make better decisions just across the board.
Yeah, I agree. And COVID was really the catalyst for all of this. There wasn't much real-time data at all.
No, the only real-time data was coming from us and Johns Hopkins. We had 50 people working literally 24 hours around the clock trying to pull data together for COVID. Johns Hopkins had a similar level of activity around it. So, and these are 50 highly skilled people that's what they were doing literally 24 hours a day around the clock.
Yep, and I witnessed a lot of cities and communities feverishly try to put together, Power BI based data dashboards and trying to kludge everything together themselves, or, as I was pushing, maybe invest in a smart city platform that allows you to take all this data from different sources and combine it together into a unified environment. But then you have that trick of visualization, right? And how do you look at the data and how do you make those decisions about the data? I think it's important to talk about the work process aspect of that. Like you mentioned, Graham, you have these data intermediaries on the ground that can actually take this data and start to drive some decision making, maybe public policy changing and, actually closing, the humans that are going to close the loop on this. I think is a pretty common problem for a lot of people that are going to implement this technology, right? It's one thing to put a model together and get the data, sucking into the model and, and actually look at the data, but then closing the loop and making that decision. What are we going to do with this is always a problem.
So
manufacturing, I covered manufacturing for 25 years and they still have that problem,
Yeah, there's a few aspects to that. So one is if you're trying to automate a process or workflow, you don't really need to worry about the visualization. You just plug it into that process or workflow. However, if you're building a new kind of capability or new way of interacting, you need some design involved in that. You need some storytelling ability. In fact, when I initially built the data science elite team, I had a new skill set that people are like, what is this? I started hiring data journalists. So think, the people that build the data stories in New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, 538, but, providing a story around the business outcome that's desired, the data that was used and the model that was built such that it elevates the insights in the language that the business is used to using visual tools and visual storytelling capabilities, and sometimes just textual. So sometimes, it's data journalism. So it's actually telling a story with data. And that's really important. And that comes out here with the Urban Institute in terms of, how are they surfacing this information to people that more than likely have no technical capability, don't even really understand necessarily the data, certainly are likely to not understand what a random forest or gradient boost model is, right? Or what an F1 metric is, F1 score is, right? And so how do you take that information and give them something meaningful?
Yeah, and I want to jump in there really quick because those are all things that we do a lot at Urban, and I could talk a while about this. But what I want to appreciate about the IBM process is, and what we appreciate about as a nonprofit is, we're never going to be the expert on any one of the machine learning methodologies that Seth just mentioned, or on the right metrics, or things like that. We have really great data scientists, but we're never going to be at the very leading edge of anything. We like to adopt things that maybe Seth's team has built, right, or others have built in the open source community, and apply it because we know our audiences and we know we know the technology, and we can sort of make that interchange work. So what I think what was really great about this project is the IBM data science elite team started and showed us some of these resources where you can go with an auto ML solution, right? So essentially the idea is you start with a tool that helps you do all the fancy choosing of a model and what the best model is for the metric you're trying to optimize, and picks that for you, right? Which previously takes a ton of time and expertise to do, and we don't really have many of those people on our staff to say, oh yeah, for this particular problem you really need to do the regularized XGBoost, of course. No, we don't have any of that, right? So you just have this auto tool that says, okay, here's the most accurate model. Now we can focus on the metrics and the communication. Right, and those are really the most important parts of the problem. We don't want to, as a profit, hire a really expensive data scientist to help us figure out the other part. We can't, first of all. But it really opens us up to do the things we're actually good at, which is like, okay, we understand the policymaker is saying, I want to optimize government resources, and I want to focus on these neighborhoods. Okay, so we need other metrics, right? So we'll work with the team on that, and we really know how to visualize and communicate to folks through our data viz and storytelling teams, but also through our contacts. We have tons of contacts. The local government, we understand how to talk to them, right? And so let's do what we're good at and not what we're, what is not our specialty, right?
And what Graham just described is using AI to help accelerate and a little bit more democratize the process of building AI. And so that's a really great use of AI, is to help provide resources in terms of the ability, kind of what Graham described. But even if there's places that have a lot of data scientists, how do you get more capacity out of them? How do you let them focus on the things that are bespoke to their business, as opposed to focusing on things that are essentially commodity? And that's what this auto AI tool that inside Watson Studio that Graham described, that's what it does.
Yeah, I always thought that was one of the great promises of AI in these types of applications, is to let people do what they do best. We're not trying to make data scientists out of everybody. Just let them do their jobs better using this valuable information. So we're totally on board with that. AI for good, right? That's the tagline for this podcast. AI for good. Can you talk about some resources? So we talked about open source and other people can use this data. Where do people go to find out more about what you guys are doing? And where would they go, if they are interested in using this open source model and information and so forth? Where do we go?
Yeah, so we have a repository. So we have this in a GitHub repository that's public, that anyone can get access to. And as I mentioned, it's in the form of a set of Jupyter notebooks that people can insert their own data into. As I described, we can provide the exact link to you, but we do have a white paper that's coming out on this as well that describes all of this in order to, or we do have a white paper, it's not coming out, it is out. And you can actually just Google IBM Urban Institute and it'll be the first hit that comes up. That's probably the easiest way for me to point people to it. And then, if people want to learn more about it and they start using it, I'm sure, I'll volunteer Graham and myself, reach out to us, and we'll make sure that, you can have access to the right resources and, dig a little deeper if you want.
Yeah, and I'll add a couple things to that. One of which is we have, on our end, we've written a blog post sort of detailing the policy background and the initial efforts we have in HUD, and then how that evolved into these efforts with IBM. And then I'll also say one of the things that we worked with the IBM team on, which I thought was really cool, was obviously putting in GitHub and making it open source was great, but there's also a starter kit in the IBM Cloud Pak for data. So if you just you don't want to worry about setting up your own resources or figuring out how to, install the right libraries in Python or whatever it may be, there's just like a pretty easy, quick start there for people who want to be able to, get up and running on the model really quick. And that was one of the things I really appreciated about the team, is they really wanted to, make this really easily available.
Yeah, thanks for doing the marketing plug for me, Graham. I appreciate it.
I thought it was a good idea. I thought it was cool. It's a win-win.
We build accelerators of all kinds into our products, and this is just another one that's for social good. And the Urban Institute is not the only AI for social good project that we have going. We have, a half a dozen going at any one time, and I think one of the things that differentiates us as well, as I said at the beginning, is not only do we provide technology to them, free for a little while and at cost in perpetuity or close to at cost. We also provide people to help them deliver projects, to help them get real value, to show them how you can use a combination of proprietary and open source tools to actually execute these projects and get extra capacity. That's this whole AI for social good program that we run at IBM. And we have we have like 250,000 people at IBM now, most of which are very passionate about some form of community service, doing good for communities that they live in. And when we reach out for volunteers, usually in minutes, we already have too many. And so, not even talking about IBM products, but talking about just the IBMers in general that are so passionate about helping the communities they live in and making, society a better place for everyone and making it inclusive for everyone. And I think that's something I'd like to point out.
I think that's definitely worth pointing out. Thank you for doing that. So if you want to find out more, just Google IBM and Urban Institute, and you will find out a lot more. I just did that myself, and a bunch of IBM links and Urban Institute stuff came up, so that does work. And if you want to find out more, I can pass information on. You can email me at lobrien, LOBRIEN, at arcweb.com, ARCWEB.com, if you want to email me and find out more. I'd be happy to help our listeners out there. And of course, if you want to find out more about ARC, you can go to www.arcweb.com. But we are just about out of time today, guys. Is there anything else we want to add before we wrap things up here? Might be good to do a follow-up on this a few months from now. See what kind of, how this is working out on the ground and what kind of results we're getting.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from Graham how communities are using this and how they're getting value from it. So for sure, I'm happy to do a follow up to hear Graham talk.
I appreciate it. Can I make my field building plug here, Larry?
Sure. Go ahead.
Right? Yeah. All right. So everyone that was on my team will turn this off if they're listening, but they've heard this too many times. But I'm really passionate about this field of AI and data science for social good, and I think there's so many ways to get involved, whether it's, as Seth said, IBMers, raising their hands and volunteering, folks working at the Urban Institute, folks who are civic data scientists in their communities. And I'm just really passionate about building up those skills and capabilities, and would encourage people to follow along and get involved in either this project or other projects that the AI for Good or our team here at the Urban Institute has done, and take a look at them and take a look at the code and get involved in this field, because we need more, as Seth said in the beginning, and I agree with it completely, we need more folks who are focused on how do we apply this amazing technology and have it benefit society in general and benefit NGOs or governments or other organizations, because we really need those folks. We really need you to get involved.
Yeah, and I think, just build on that a little bit. I often get asked, I want to be a data scientist. How do I do that? And I've taken this MOOC or that MOOC, this online course or that online course and gotten this certification. My response to them is, you need to actually do projects. And many of these people are skilled either in statistics or coding, and they just want to kind of bring those together. And I tell them, find something you're passionate about and get the data and pull it together and do a project. One thing that I'm going to start saying, that I started saying over the course of last year is reach out to your favorite nonprofit. They are probably looking for people to help them. And you can help them with what you've learned and what you already know to actually execute projects and put what you've learned through these classes to work. And that's really when you learn it. And so, I encourage people who want to get into the field of data science or AI, like I just said, reach out to the Urban Institute, reach out to Diaper Bank, reach out to, whatever your favorite nonprofit is, and see if there's the help that they need in this space, because I bet there is.
That's great advice, Seth. Thank you. We definitely do need more people. And we do need more people to volunteer for stuff like this. I know, growing up in my family, we're always very service oriented and did a lot of community service stuff. So it's good to hear that this is going on. This is a lot. It's a refreshing change for this podcast that we're actually talking about stuff like this, and we're talking about technology at the same time. Usually we talk about the economic benefits or, things like that, but this has been a great discussion. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. Again, we're talking to Seth Dobrin and Graham MacDonald. Seth is with IBM and Graham is with the Urban Institute. And hopefully we'll be doing this again in a few months to track how this project is going. But I want to thank you for joining us on this latest edition of the ARC Smart City Podcast, and we will see you next time. Thanks.